It's Thursday evening at 6 p.m., which means it is once again time for the Lions Grid. Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. Of course, we are coming to you live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. And I'm joined this evening by Mr. Joseph Wilmot. Joe, how are you doing?
Doing great. It's a great day. You know, the sunshine today, 45 degrees, clear weather. It was a good day.
Yeah. Certainly, and great to have you here. And of course, we're missing Jeffrey today. Jeffrey had another thing, but he will be here with us in spirit as we hopefully can run through and do him proud here with a good quality show. So we'll start out like we do every week here as we go ahead and grind the grid. It was a very interesting week of action here in Week 13. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and we'll jump into the games and the action that happened this past week. So starting out on Thursday Night Football, which was actually one of the better Thursday night matchups that we've seen so far this season, we had the Seahawks traveling to Dallas to take on the Cowboys. A bit of a shootout there, but Dallas gets the win 41-35 over the Seahawks. Next up on Sunday, we had an AFC South matchup as the Titans hosted the Colts. The Colts were able to get a 31-28 victory over their division rivals in overtime. Then we had the Jets hosting the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons were able to get a 13-8 victory over the Jets, and that is the fifth straight loss for the Jets. Then we'll talk about this game here in just a little bit, but the Lions getting a victory on the road, 33-28, and improving to 9-3 on the season. Next up, one of the two teams with a 5-game winning streak, the Denver Broncos, were headed to Houston to take on the Texans, and that winning streak was snapped, 22-17. The Texans getting the victory there over the surging Broncos. And what was perhaps the worst game of the weekend, we had the Chargers traveling to New England to take on the Patriots. All of the 6 points that were scored in this game were scored by the Chargers in the first half, and so it was a scoreless second half there in Foxborough. The Chargers getting that win 6-0, and the Patriots falling to 2-10 on the season. Then we had a surprise victory as the Cardinals went into Pittsburgh, winning that game 24-10. And to add injury to insult, Kenny Pickett was injured in that game at halftime and will look to be missing multiple weeks for the Steelers as they try to climb their way into the AFC playoffs. Then we had the Dolphins traveling to Washington to play the struggling Commanders. No problem there for the Dolphins. They got an easy 45-15 victory. Then an NFC South matchup between the Carolina Panthers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers getting a 21-18 victory against their division rivals, and the Panthers are now officially the first team to be eliminated from playoff contention this year. Then we had a matchup between the two NFC powerhouses. We had the 49ers traveling to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles, and the 49ers just destroyed the Eagles 42-19. Jalen Hurts was knocked out of that game. He's not expected to miss a lot of time, but definitely opening things up there in the NFC playoff race. Then we had the Browns traveling to Los Angeles to take on the Rams. The Rams and Matt Stafford getting a 36-19 victory there. Then Kansas City traveling to Lambeau to take on the Packers, and the Packers able to win that game 27-19, improving to 6-6 on the season. And then finally, in what ended up being a backup bowl, the Bengals getting a win over the Jaguars 34-31 in overtime. Trevor Lawrence knocked out of that game with a high ankle sprain, and we'll talk about that in a little bit here. There were 6 teams on a bye. We had the Baltimore Ravens, the Buffalo Bills, Las Vegas Raiders, Minnesota Vikings, New York Giants, and Chicago Bears. This was the second to last, the second to last of the bye weeks. There's only one more bye week, that being this week for 2 teams, but these 6 teams weren't in action here in Week 13. So a lot going on, Joe. We saw some really good games. There were some good matchups that ended up being kind of one-sided in that Eagles and 49ers game. Anything from this past week that really surprised you, Joe?
I didn't like the fact that you said Denver lost. So, I mean, I was rooting for them to go good. Russell Wilson in there over there at Denver and leading the charge with the new look Denver Broncos. And then Green Bay being able to defeat The Kansas City Chiefs, that's a surprise. That's an upset. It's like all of a sudden the Packers have life here. They're tied with the Minnesota Vikings with 6-6 record, and if Detroit goes on a losing streak, it's anybody's division. But right now we're pretty secure in the division. But the San Francisco 49ers, blowing out the Philadelphia Eagles. Jalen Hurts, could that injury, be detrimental throughout the rest of the season and an impactful part of the Eagles' offense throughout the remainder of their season? So these are some questions coming up that we're going to have to find out while the season rolls on.
Yeah, there are just 5 weeks left here in the season, so a lot of those questions will be answered in the short time. And there were 2 teams on 5-game winning streaks. It was the Broncos and the Eagles, and both of those streaks came to an end. So now the 3 hottest teams in the NFL in terms of winning streak are the 49ers with a 4-game winning streak, the Dallas Cowboys, who are on a 4-game winning streak, and surprisingly, in the AFC, the Indianapolis Colts are riding a 4-game winning streak. So those are your 3 3 teams at the moment with the most consecutive wins at this point in the season. So be interesting to see how things play out here. And we'll turn our eyes and our attention now to the game between the Lions and the Saints. Obviously, a good win for the Lions. They're able to improve to 9-3 on the season. Really established themselves as the favorites to win the NFC North. They're sitting on their throne and looking good up there. 5 games left to go. I think really the interesting thing about this game, Joe, was that the Lions did a good job, I think, responding after that loss to the Packers. They came out early in this game and jumped out to a 21-0 lead. But then things got a little shaky. The Saints were able to come back and make things interesting. At one point in time, the score got as close as 24-21. But ultimately, the Lions were able to make enough plays down the line of the game to be able to win that game. And you saw multiple players step up in that game. Sam Laporta had a pretty big game. We saw a nice run from Jameson Williams. So there was definitely a lot to like in that game. But some of the things not to like were around injuries. Thankfully, this season, outside of the secondary, the Lions have really avoided any major injuries. But we did see Frank Ragnow leave the game with a left knee injury. He's been sort of fighting a toe injury that's been lasting since last season all year. But he was taken out of that game with a knee injury and is expected to miss a couple of weeks. And then Alan McNeil, probably the most productive defensive lineman outside of Aiden Hutchinson for us, is also going to miss at least 4 of the next games. So he's going to be out for at least the Chicago, Denver, Minnesota, and Dallas game because he was put on IR with an injury himself. So a couple of injuries that could certainly impact us here in these next couple of games, Joe. But overall, I think a lot to be happy about if you're a Lions fan. What were your thoughts from the game against the Saints?
Yeah, they showed up. They played a strong first quarter, getting the lead, going out there, really putting the pressure on the Saints to respond. The Saints responded, and, really the Saints had a chance of winning that game. I was kind of rooting for Jameis Winston to make a move at quarterback position and to put up some points and really put the pressure on the Lions. He's a backup quarterback, had some time as a starter, but you just like to see players that don't normally get the opportunity to play well, in games, or to play in games, get an opportunity to be effective. And it was really good to see Jameson Winston out there, but he was just inaccurate down the stretch. And Detroit was able to win after stopping them on 4 downs. But Detroit's got to do a better job at playing the entire game. They get off of those big leads, and then they kind of just put it on cruise control. They're not really, playing the full game. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, we've talked about it in previous weeks. They kind of struggle in the third quarter to keep things going. And we saw them sort of quiet down a little bit in the middle of this game, the second and third quarter. And then they turned it up a little bit there in the fourth quarter to hold on to the wins. But certainly, I think one of the things that great teams do is they play consistently 4 quarters. And so the Lions are definitely a good team, but I think separating them from being a great team is that fact that they don't always, to your point, Joe, bring that level of intensity needed to sustain for 4 full quarters. They seem to dial it in occasionally. And when you're playing good teams, like we will be come playoff time, it's challenging to win in those situations if you can't consistently play a solid 4 quarters. So that'll be something we'll have to keep an eye on. But it was nice to see Jared Goff. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
One thing, if Detroit can get out to those 21, 24, 28-point leads, at the beginning of the game, why can't they score that many points in the middle or at the end of the game to come back? If they're playing Baltimore and they're getting blown out in the beginning and first half of the game, why can't they come out in the second half and put up 21 points, straight, like that?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. I don't know if it's just because they get sort of taken out of their comfort zone and are forced to play a way they don't want to do, playing from behind. It definitely, the Lions seem to, and I mean, and this is most teams, right, in the NFL, teams like to play with a lead. That's just, it feels better. You have the momentum on your side. And so it may just be one of those things where they just don't feel comfortable as comfortable playing from behind. Although we did see them do rather well against Chicago before Thanksgiving. Mind you, Chicago isn't really a good football team. So, it's hard to say if they would be able to do that. And we certainly saw them struggle against Baltimore, to your point, who jumped out early all over the Lions. And they struggled to come back in that game. So, I think it's partially just, it depends on who they're playing. But this Lions team definitely seems like they don't have a whole lot of quit in them, which I like. They're definitely a team where, they may not be able to sustain the same level of success through all 4 quarters, but they're certainly not going to just phone it in, right? They're going to be out there and they're going to be playing and they're going to be trying to make the plays. It's just sometimes they seem to hit a dry spell in games, but certainly not due to a lack of effort on the players' part, which is nice to see, because in years past, it has felt like it's been an effort issue. But Dan Campbell, one thing you can say about this Lions team underneath him is he certainly gets them ready to play. And it was nice to see, too, Jared Goff return a little bit to form. I didn't have any turnovers in this game after having 6 turnovers in back-to-back weeks combined. So good to see him take care of the football, and certainly something we'll need him to do if we want to make a run in the postseason. And of course, this is the first time since 1962 that the Lions have started 9-3. So we are in uncharted territories for our lifetime, Joe. We've never seen a Lions team quite this good. So it's going to be interesting to see what their ceiling is moving forward, because we're in uncharted territory. This is brand new stuff for us Lions fans that haven't been around since the 60s.
Lions and Wolverines. Wolverines might be going for a national championship. And, the Lions might be playing a home playoff game and competing in the playoffs for a Super Bowl.
It's exciting time for Michigan in sports. You got U of M, you got Lions, you even have the Red Wings who are showing some signs of life. And then you have, on the other end of the spectrum, the Pistons, who are just awful. Yeah. The Lions may honestly finish with more wins this season than the Pistons, and that is frightening. So speaking of frightening, let's transition now, Joe, to our champs and chumps for the week. The Pistons would be a good chump any week, but for my champ, I'm going to go with Sam Laporta. He had a big game this past week. He had 140 yards and a touchdown. He caught all 9 of his targets. And really, we've seen in the past with the Lions, they've spent some high draft picks on tight ends. And it's nice to see it finally pay off, to finally see a tight end actually live up to the draft capital that was used to acquire him. And it's refreshing, because Hawkinson certainly didn't live up to expectations. We didn't see that in the past with Eric Ebron either. And then I forget who was the Georgia tight end that we also drafted in the second round.
Brandon Pettigrew?
Yeah, Brandon Pettigrew. Yep. So, we've drafted all three of those guys higher in the draft. They never really lived up to expectations, but now finally, with the fourth guy, Sam Laporta, we're starting to see a tight end that is delivering on that promise. So he's my champ. And then my chump this week is going to be the Tennessee Titans special teams. They had 2 consecutive blocked punts against them, and the second one was awful. He really just walked over and blocked that punt. The punter ended up getting injured on that play as well, and he is the holder for their place kicker. So when they went to go kick a field goal to take the lead, they ended up missing that extra point. And so my chumps, the Titans special teams, they were all sorts of a mess between the 2 block punts, one which was returned for a touchdown, and that missed field goal. They did not do the Titans any favors in that game, as they lost in overtime to the Colts. So yeah, that's my pick. Joe, who do you have as your champ, and who do you have as your chump this week?
Well, I'm going to go with quarterbacks in this one. I'm going to go with Derek Carr, who got obliterated by the defensive line, an injury that knocked him out of the football game. He's my chump. And then, Jared Goff coming out in that game, putting up some touchdown scores through the air. That's what I said he needed to do, was play a good, efficient game through the air, and he did. So he's my champ.
Very nice. Yeah, he. I remember that being one of the things you wanted to see in that game, and he certainly lived up to expectations. So good to see. Good to see. We'll shift now into our buy or sell segment and sort of turn our attention back to the NFL at large here. And Joe, the first question we have here, on whether or not you're going to buy it or sell it, is with Philadelphia losing to San Francisco, the top seed in the NFC, and of course the first round bye that comes with it, is now up for grabs. The Eagles are still 10-2 and in first place, but they have games upcoming against Dallas that could certainly end up costing them a couple of wins, and it's not certain if they'll actually end up winning the NFC East. We'll talk about that here in just a second. The remaining games are against the Cowboys, the Seahawks, the Cardinals. They do have a favorable schedule. They got the Cowboys, the Seahawks, the Giants, the Cardinals, and the Giants. So 2 games against the Giants, 1 against the Cardinals. But these next 2 weeks against the Cowboys and the Seahawks certainly aren't gimmies. So with that in mind, do you think them now having lost to San Francisco, there's a chance that either the 49ers or, dare I say, the Lions have a chance to steal the number 1 seed? Are you buying or selling this one?
I'm going to have to buy this. I think the Lions, they might have an opportunity to get the number 1 seed in the first round bye. Philadelphia comes out this season and they go strong, going 10-1, and then all of a sudden get knocked down by San Francisco. And, I would have to say that if San Francisco can do that much damage to them, and San Francisco's lost some teams that have not really lived up to expectations as far as, or not even had good seasons. I would think that that Philadelphia, with the injury to Hurts, people are going to be attacking that. The opposing teams are going to be attacking that injury wherever it's at. So I would think that, the Lions have a good opportunity here because their remaining schedule only features 3 teams with fairly decent records, that being Minnesota twice and Dallas once. So if they can win those games or win out the remainder of the season, they've lost 3 games this season. Every game remaining besides the Dallas game is a winnable game.
Yeah, I think, and even against Dallas, it'll be interesting to see because, the Cowboys have really only beaten one other team that has a winning record at this point in the season. They did beat the Jets when they were 1-0, and they beat some other teams that had winning records. But in terms of teams that are still with a winning record, the Cowboys have only beaten one other team. And so it's going to be interesting to see because, the Eagles, they have the Cowboys and the Seahawks. The 49ers still have the Ravens and the Seahawks on their schedule, as well as the Rams, who have been playing rather well. And of course, we have, as you mentioned, Joe, the Vikings, the Cowboys, and even the Broncos. I'll still put them there. Their win streak maybe came to an end, but that's certainly, at least that game's at home at Ford Field. So hopefully the Lions can defend the den there and get a victory. But I think the opportunity is there. I think with that loss, it sort of opens the windows. opens the door for both the Niners and the Lions, and it's going to be interesting to see how this season plays out. And as we look at our next question here, a lot is going to depend, I think, on this right here. Are you buying or selling, Joe, the fact that the Cowboys will end up beating the Eagles and winning the NFC East? It's a big game when they play each other this weekend. And then, of course, both teams would have to win out the remainder of the year. But it's kind of interesting, Joe. You think the Cowboys can do it?
I like both the Cowboys and Eagles in any given year, but this year in particular, I like the Cowboys more than I like the Eagles. So I would like to see the Cowboys win the division. I think Cowboys, have a pretty good chance at beating the Detroit Lions late in the season simply because we've never done this well. And, I would think that, Detroit will feel good about themselves to play comfortable and not exert too much competitive nature at the end of the season, thus giving Dallas the competitive edge in the football game they have against the Lions. So if they do that and the Cowboys have a better record down the stretch than the Eagles, I think the Cowboys have only lost 2 games more than the Eagles, 1 or 2 more games than the Eagles. So I would say that Cowboys have a good chance at taking the NFC East.
I think a lot of it is going to be decided this weekend. It's a big game. It's in Dallas, which certainly helps them out. My only concern for Dallas really is the fact that there has been a lot of criticism this week about the Eagles, about them since they did get beaten. Um, since the 49ers went in there and really beat them by such a large margin, there's been some talk about them maybe not being as good as advertised, so that may fuel their fire a little bit. But I think it's going to be really important about what happens this weekend. So it's the Sunday night football game. Mark it on your calendars if you're a fan of football. Definitely a big one that should really impact this race for not only the NFC East, but also for the NFC number 1 seed. This Cowboys Eagles game should be pretty spicy this weekend.
We don't like spicy, Kevin. We don't like spicy.
Well, something that wasn't real spicy.
It's your catchphrase. I like that. But I mean, anytime I'm not a fan of spicy foods, but I like your catchphrase.
Well, something that might give you a little bit of indigestion from some spiciness if you're a Jacksonville fan, the injury to Trevor Lawrence. He suffered a high ankle sprain this past week against Cincinnati. Currently, Jacksonville is sitting in first place down in the AFC South, and there are a number of other teams on the bubble there. But at 8-4, if Trevor Lawrence has to miss significant time during this last 5 games, Joe, do you think it's possible that the Jaguars miss the playoffs?
Most certainly, because Trevor Lawrence is the leader of that team. Jacksonville would not be where they are today in the standings and their record wise if they didn't have Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback. He seems to be a good person. I think that if he misses some time, that Jacksonville's in jeopardy of going lower in the playoff positioning or even being knocked out if they have a really terrible end of the season. But Trevor Lawrence is a good quarterback, and they need him to be competitive. Yeah.
Yeah, I know I'm not the first person to mention it or talk about it, but the fact that they made him walk down the tunnel to go get evaluated more, hobbling along with the help of the security guard and the medical staff, instead of having a golf cart there for him in the state of Florida, which may be the world's capital for golf carts. I mean, just come on, man. You gotta be able to get your star quarterback, your franchise quarterback back there and not have him have to walk on a high ankle sprain. And yeah, we'll take a look here at a moment at what the playoff picture, but there are a lot of teams, including the Colts and the Texans, that are right there below them. So if Trevor Lawrence isn't able to go, Jacksonville is their threat level is high for missing the playoffs, and there's not a lot with only 5 games left in the season. There's not a whole lot of room for error for any team. So certainly something if you're a Jacksonville fan. Hopefully you see Trevor Lawrence back on that field sooner rather than later. in an interesting turn of events, Joe, it seems like Puka Nakua, the rookie wide receiver, has surpassed Cooper Kupp, who the last few seasons has been, if not the best wide receiver in the league, at least top five. Are you buying the statement here, Joe, that Puka Nakua is now more important to the Rams than Cooper Kupp?
I'd say they're even. I'd say Matthew Stafford has a number one in Cooper Kupp and a number two in Puka Nakua. You know, they got they got go to wide receivers. You know, both of them are healthy. You know, look for Stafford to connect with the number one and number two. You know, they add a third slot wide receiver that's got a speed and a quick release and sure hands. Then they have a competitive playoff football team. You know, despite the defense being up and down throughout this season, you know, it's like, uh, yeah, I would say. I would say they're about even. I can't buy or sell. I'd have to sell that he is more important than Cooper Kupp. I think Cooper Kupp was proven to be the MVP in the Super Bowl, so we can't jump on this rookie right now and say, "Yep, he's more important than Cooper." So, you know, it's 50-50 right now. It's a shared league.
Yeah, I think if you just look at the stats, it certainly looks like Puka definitely has the. If you looked at their numbers and didn't put a name next to them, you would certainly think that those numbers are flopped or switched, right? Puka Nakua has over 70, or he has 77 receptions currently for over 1,000 yards, whereas Cooper Kupp has 33 receptions for 432 yards. So, if you didn't, if you didn't know that looking at the numbers, you'd probably think they were reversed, just based off of what Cooper Kupp has done, like I said, the previous couple of seasons. I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens this offseason. Obviously, the Rams recently signed Kupp to a pretty big contract, but they have proven in the past, most notably when they traded Jared Goff to the Lions, that they're not afraid to trade a guy that they recently signed to a big contract. And I'm certain there are teams out there that would have an appetite for Cooper Kupp. So that's when it comes to trading and trying to build out the rest of the team this offseason, it's going to be interesting to see what the front office for the Rams decides to do. If they want to keep Cooper Kupp there and keep him with Nakua, or if they think that Puka can sort of be that guy in the future and look to get something from Kupp to help out in other areas of the team, because I'm sure they'd get plenty of interest from other teams, including possibly the Carolina Panthers, who need a number one wide receiver to go with their young quarterback down there, Bryce Young. So it'd be interesting to see what happens.
Listen. The Rams need Cooper Kupp simply for his work history. Okay, you know, Puka Nakua, you know, he's a rookie. He's having a good year. You know, things will balance out next year with the two of them. You know, but I think that they can still be competitive throughout the remainder of this year. Although Nakua may have better numbers by a large margin this year, you know, Cooper Kupp was also injured at the beginning of the season.
Yep.
So, you know, it just might get balanced out, but Stafford's still a good quarterback. They still have two go-to wide receivers right here. You know, you add another third wide receiver that's pretty clutch. You know, you solidify the defense. I don't know if Aaron Donald's still playing, but I don't know anybody on the Rams defense. So, you know, if you make that unit a team unit, you know, play like they did in the two Super Bowls they've been in recently, you know, they'll be right back up there in the NFC.
Yeah, they still have a decent chance of making the playoffs this year. Obviously, they have to win to do it, but they've been winning. They're on a 3-game winning streak, I want to say. So certainly they have a chance here to make a splash. And certainly, I think if I'm building a team, I like having Cooper Kupp and Puka on the team. But if it'll be interesting to see how the Rams feel about it this offseason. I certainly am in agreement with you. You can never have too many weapons on offense. So personally, I would keep them, but we'll have to see if the Rams front office feels that same way this offseason, Joe. Speaking of teams that are surprising a little bit here, on winning streaks, the Green Bay Packers. Uh, Joe, we beat them earlier in the season, took advantage of the fact that we were playing them at Lambeau, not at the end of the year, and got a victory. The Packers are currently on a 3-game winning streak. They've improved to 6-6 on the season, which of course brings them tied with the Minnesota Vikings, although the Vikings do have the tiebreaker currently as they beat them earlier this season as well. Do you think, Joe, that the Green Bay Packers are now the biggest threat to the Lions in the NFC North?
No, this is a sell. Number one threat in the NFC North is still the Minnesota Vikings. We have 2 games against them left. If we drop a few games here down the stretch, and they're still within striking distance, and they win both those games, and we have an even record, Minnesota gets the playoff bid in the division. So I mean that's the biggest threat is Minnesota.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see, right? Because the Vikings are kind of in a weird spot at the moment. They obviously brought in Josh Dobbs, and for a moment we're really excited about him. And it seemed like that he may be able to turn their or make salvage their season with the Kirk Cousins injury. But now there's some rumors that they may be going to Nick Mullins and maybe turning away from Josh Dobbs. So, there's only 5 weeks left. I think we're going to get a lot of questions answered. The fact that we play them twice in the last 3 weeks, certainly a big threat to our season, right? We have to beat them, especially if we want to keep pace with Philadelphia and San Francisco. So I agree with you, Joe, and I agree with Edward here, who also is a sell and agrees that Minnesota is the biggest threat. Just because we have to play them, and we've already played the Packers our 2 games, I would agree Minnesota is a big threat. But the Packers, for a team that was supposed to be kind of in a weird rebuilding stage, they've turned it on here the last couple of weeks, which is interesting. I think a lot of similarities between them and the Lions in the fact that the secondary for the Packers has been had a lot of injuries and has forced guys to step up, very similar to what's happening with the Lions. But the difference between the Lions and the Packers has been that their front seven, led by Rashawn Gary, has been able to apply a lot more pressure to enemy quarterbacks, whereas we haven't seen that from the Lions. So that secondary that's beat up for the Packers has looked better because they've been putting quarterbacks under more pressure, whereas our secondary has kind of had to make do without a whole lot of pressure on the quarterback. So very similar things going on with the Packers and the Lions, and it's just interesting to see how the 2 teams are sort of handling it. So something to keep an eye on, but definitely I think obviously our focus needs to be on Minnesota and not what the Packers are doing. This next one here, we have Mike Evans with his performance this past week against they were playing the Panthers. He hauled in 7 catches for 162 yards, including a 75-yard touchdown. And that gave him his 10th consecutive 1,000-yard season. That ties him with Randy Moss for the second most consecutive 1,000-yard seasons, behind only the Hall of Famer Jerry Rice. Being in that category with Jerry Rice and Randy Moss, both Hall of Famers, Joe, do you think that Mike Evans will be in the Hall of Fame when he retires?
No, I'm not a fan of Mike Evans. I don't think he'll make the Hall of Fame.
He's got the Super Bowl win. He's got the stats. I think it'll be hard for him not to make it there. I don't know if he'll be a first ballot guy. But I think by the time things are said and done, I'm going to buy this one, and I think he will be in there because that is, it's impressive. 10 seasons with 1,000 yards receiving back to back to back to back. That's not an easy thing to do. It's a reason that he's tied there with Randy Moss and just behind Jerry Rice. So I'll give it to him. And Edward here is going to agree as well. Not super flashy, but gets the job done. Has the Super Bowl in the numbers. Doesn't think he'll be left out from the voting. Next up here, Joe, we have a Lions-esque question. There's been a lot of talk since the Panthers have fired Frank Reich and have that head coach opening. One name you see Ben Johnson showing up for a lot is the Panthers. But whether it's the Panthers or another team, Joe, are you buying or selling the fact that Ben Johnson will leave the Lions this offseason for a head coaching position? Do you think this is the year he gets the nod and gets to take over another NFL squad?
Yeah, most certainly. Because if If the Lions lose in the playoffs this year, it's like, well, this was really the best year we had to compete for the Super Bowl. You know, if they win the Super Bowl, that's a different story. You know, Ben Johnson might be back, but if after all he does on the offense this year, and you know they get the Lions in the playoffs and they do all that, you know, uh, I think that he'll leave for Carolina or some other place for a head coaching position. Uh, you know, because he's a good coach. You know, he's innovative. You know, he's creative on the offensive side. So I think he'll be a good head coach, but we'll have to remain to see what happens.
Yeah, there's only 32 head coaching positions that are available in the world for the NFL. So when a spot does come open and a team offers it to you, it means a lot. Like if it's been your dream to be a head coach in the NFL and you get that call from someone giving you that opportunity, it's really hard to say no. So I wouldn't blame Ben Johnson if he leaves. Certainly would love to see him come back because what he's done with Jared Goff and this Detroit offense has been, impressive. The fact that, we're talking about being 9-3 for the first time since 1962. A big part of that is what he and this offense have done. So would certainly love to see him back with the Lions, but again, sort of recognize the fact that, when you get the opportunity to take one of these positions, oftentimes, you're going to take it because you don't know if you'll get another one. And there aren't many people who get to call themselves NFL head coaches. And Edward here is agreeing with us. Unfortunately, thinks he leaves. And I agree. We were kind of lucky. It was nice to see a coach decide to stick around and want to be a part of what was being built here in Detroit, and not jump ship. So, kudos to him for that. I think it definitely speaks a lot to his character, and certainly we'll wish him the best down the road. But hopefully that'll be a problem for the offseason for the Lions. And then, we talked about the moon last week and its ability to impact games. Another thing that the Lions subreddit has noticed is that the Lions this season are 8-0 while wearing matching jerseys and pants. So that's, blue on blue, making gray on gray, making sure that the colors match. Joe, should the Lions just go ahead then and wear matching uniforms the remainder of the season so that they can run the table here and get that number one seed in the NFC?
Yeah, I mean, if you got an 8-0 record, why would you stop doing something that's perfect?
I'm there with you. I'm not super superstitious, but at the same time, whatever's going to help you get the job done
until it becomes not perfect, So
yeah, exactly. Might as well get whatever help you can get, whatever lift you need, because these 5 games are super important. So if just wearing the matching uniforms will get us there, hey, I'm all for it. That was the old one right there from the Moons. But there are 5 games left. Joe, we talked last week when there were 6 games left. We all picked the Lions to get a win. I think we were all in that 4-3 game spot for how many games they could win. But with 5 games remaining, those being against Chicago, Denver, Minnesota, Dallas, and of course Minnesota, has that number changed for you about how many of those games they will win to close out the season?
I'm going to say I think they win at least 2 more games. I think Chicago and one of the Minnesota games are going to be guaranteed wins. Denver, Dallas, and the other Minnesota game are all up in question depending on competitive play. But I think we can pretty much guarantee at least 2 more wins. And who I think those are against is Chicago and one of the games against Minnesota.
Yeah, I think really, I think we have, with all 5 of these games, we probably have a good chance of winning any of these. My biggest concerns are obviously the later game. We're playing Denver, Dallas, and Minnesota. We haven't played Minnesota yet, so depending on how that first game against Minnesota goes, will certainly impact how I feel about the second meeting. But depending on what happens with Denver and Dallas as well, that's going to impact where we are in the NFC in general. We talked about potentially playing for the number 1 seed, but if we get knocked out of contention and we can't catch either Philadelphia, Dallas, or San Francisco for that number 1 seed, by the time that last week rolls around against Minnesota, we may not be playing for much of anything. There may be no advantage to us winning that game or losing that game. So at that point in time, that may change if the starters are playing and things like that. So I think your prediction there about 2 games is probably pretty accurate. 2 to 3 games, as Edward points out, may be away or may be where we're at. But I definitely think I'm not scared of any of these teams. I think Dallas is probably going to be the most challenging one and probably the most likely one for us to get a loss. But at the same time, Dallas hasn't looked great all season long. They're doing real well right now, but I'm definitely looking forward to that game to see how we stack up. So I think you're pretty right on there, Joe, with the 2 games mark. But we'll see. We'll see how it turns out. And then Edward, of course, the 2 to 3 2 games won't really matter unless it's for the home playoffs. Yep, I'm in that same boat. I think that depending on where we are in the playoff race will determine how those last couple of games, the importance we place on them. And so with that, let's go ahead and take a look at the playoff picture here before we jump into our Kings of the North segment. So if we come here and we take a look at both the AFC and NFC side, we have a new number 1 seed in the AFC, the Miami Dolphins taking that, and then we have the Baltimore Ravens, who are on a bye week, are now the number 2 seed. Kansas City, fresh off that loss to the Packers, are the 3 seed. Jacksonville's in 4th, and then the 3 wildcard teams currently in the AFC are the Steelers, the Browns, and the Colts. All 3 of those teams at 7 and 5. And then on the NFC side of things, we have the Eagles still in first place, but now have opened the door for the 49ers, the Lions, and then, of course, there's our lowly NFC South representative, the Falcons, here at 6 and 6. The Cowboys are 9 and 3, are currently hold a wild card slot, and then 2 NFC North teams at 6 and 6. And if we scroll down here a little bit and take a look at some of the bubble teams, it will start with the AFC here. So this is what we were talking about earlier when we were mentioning that if Trevor Lawrence misses any time, it could be trouble for the Jaguars, because you have Houston at 7 and 5, you got Denver at 6 and 6, Cincinnati at 6 and 6, Buffalo here at 6 and 6, and then a number of teams at 5 and 7 and 4 and 8 who are still mathematically in it. But there's definitely people that if things don't go well for Jacksonville these last 5 games, you could see either the Colts or the Texans take their spot, and then some of these other wild card spots being challenging them for the wild card spots. There's some of these other bubble teams. So
I want to see Denver and Buffalo get in.
Yeah, it's going to be a tight race here for the AFC, and then on the NFC side of things, not as tight. We do have a number of teams here at the 6 and 6 spot. So we have the Vikings, the Packers, the Rams, and Seattle all sort of fighting for these wild card spots. But for the most part, your division leaders have distanced themselves, which is great. We're sitting well above Green Bay and Minnesota at the moment. And you can see here, we're already seeing there's scenarios for Philadelphia clinching a playoff berth, for San Francisco clinching one, and for Dallas clinching one. None yet for the Lions, but we'll keep an eye on that and keep you up to date. And then, of course, here are the different tiebreakers that exist. San Francisco is ahead of us in a tiebreaker. So if we finish the same record as the 49ers, the number 1 seed would go to them based off of conference record at this time. And of course, if we won, both teams would have to win out, presumably, to be the number 1 seed. So that would stay the same because they have a game advantage there. Of course, Minnesota being ahead of the Packers based off the head-to-head record. And then you can see here the Rams, too, unfortunately, are behind both the Vikings and Packers due to the head-to-head record. But definitely some stuff to keep your eye on here for the NFC. And then on the AFC, not a whole lot of scenarios going on here. You can see no team for the AFC yet can quite clinch a playoff berth. But the tiebreakers, Miami is ahead of Baltimore, Kansas City being ahead of Jacksonville, and then Pittsburgh being ahead of Cleveland currently. So they're, we're not as close to locking in this AFC field as we are to the NFC. We're close to getting 3 teams locked in for the NFC playoffs. And the AFC playoffs are still very much wide open. So the only team mathematically incapable of making the playoffs at this time is the Carolina Panthers. Only team eliminated. Everybody else still technically has a shot. So it'll be interesting to see. And we can see here coming from Edward saying the Dolphins will fall, and it'll be Baltimore being the number 1 seed, and he thinks that the Eagles will be able to hold on to the NFC. Joe, we talked about it earlier, but I think a lot of that is going to come down to this Sunday's game between the Cowboys and them. Sunday Night Football down in Jerry World should be a really good game and is going to impact
the remainder of the NFL season and the college football season is going to be football mania.
It is exciting times. If you're a fan of football, you're going to be in for some treats this holiday season. It's setting up nicely. And of course, looking at the King of the North, it's still your Detroit Lions. We're still there. We're 9-3. We're 3 games up on the Vikings and the Packers. So as long as we control our destiny, Joe, as long as we continue to win, we do have 3 games against NFC North opponents remaining, that being the one against the Bears that's this weekend, and then our 2 games against the Vikings. So as long as we take care of business against our NFC North rivals, I think it's safe to say, Joe, that we will earn our first ever NFC North crown. And that's exciting things for the Lions.
I'm going to buy the T-shirt when they win the NFC North.
I think I will as well, because who knows if we'll get another one. It hasn't happened before, so we got to celebrate it when you can. And then for our Hot Butt segment, everyone is still pretty much on here. The only addition we did make, and we talked about them last week, of course, here's a list of some of the casualties that have happened along the way. But we still have Matt Eberflus, still have Ron Rivera, Brian Dabble, Bill Belichick, Mike Vrabel, Brandon Staley, Sean McDermott, Arthur Smith, Todd Bowles, and the new addition was Mr. Dennis Allen here. And I think what Jeff said keeps continuing to ring truer and truer. Whoever ends up winning the NFC South, it will probably keep their job. But we already seen Frank Reich jettisoned from his team. These other 3 coaches, the 2 that end up on the losing squads, could very easily be gone in the NFC South as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And depending on what happens with that playoff game, you could potentially see even the winner get ejected. So NFC South is a mess, and it'll be interesting to see what happens this offseason. All right, Joe. So we've gone through our hot butts. We've gone through our Kings of the North. All that's left to do here is turn our eyes to this Sunday's game against Chicago. So without any further ado, we'll talk a little bit here about the storylines heading into this game. Of course, the Lions, as we've mentioned, are now 9-3, traveling to Chicago to take on their division rivals, the Bears, who are 4-8. Of course, the Lions beat them earlier this season, back in November. They came from behind to win 31-26. And that was Justin Fields' first game back from his thumb injury, so he's had a chance to come back. They also are coming off a bye week, so he should be even healthier than he was when he was in that game. And of course, with it being in Chicago, Joe, there's a chance that the weather may impact that game because, of course, Soldier Field is outside. And so there's the potential for that cold Chicago weather to impact this game. If we take a look at what the sports betting people at MGM are saying, the Lions are favored to win this game. The spread is 3.5, so the Lions are minus 3.5, and the Bears are plus 3.5. The over/under for this game, they're saying 43 points, and the money line is Detroit minus 175, Chicago plus 145. So favoriting the Lions here, and I think that's fair, Joe. Of course, the last time we saw the Bears play before their bye week, they were able to get a 12-10 victory against the Minnesota Vikings. But in that game, even though they won 12-10, that was with 5 turnovers from Josh Dobbs and the Minnesota Vikings. So only getting 12 points in a game where you force 5 turnovers doesn't make you real. You left a lot of points there on the scoreboard on the field. are you concerned about this game, Joe, or do you think the Lions will be able to win this one fairly easy against their division rivals?
It will not be an easy football game. They played us tough last time. I think the Lions will get the win, but I think it's going to be a tough football game in the Windy City. It's going to be windy, is what I hear. It's going to be very, very windy. So throwing the ball might be tough, but we have a better run game than Chicago. So I think we'll put together some of the elements, but yeah, it'll be a tough football game. No, not an easy game.
Yeah, I would definitely feel better. Frank Ragnow is probably missing this game with that knee injury. I would definitely feel better with him at center, but I have a feeling that Joe, you are on the right track of what we'll see out of this Lions offense. You'll probably see a healthy helping of David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs trying to run this football as much as possible, and then letting Jared Goff do what he does best on occasion, throwing from the play action. With that weather being certainly a factor there. So I think again, this is a game that the Lions should win. They're favorited for a reason. And we thankfully so far this season, the Lions have done a good job of beating the teams they're supposed to. There've been a couple. You could argue that game against the Packers is one of the exceptions where they should have beat a team and they weren't able to. But for the most part, they've done a really good job this season of beating teams that they should. The Bears have a losing record for a reason, so I feel pretty confident in saying the Lions in this one as well. And even though Jeff isn't here to lock in his pick, I did get it from him earlier today, and he is also picking the Lions in this one. So, we're all feeling pretty confident about the Lions. I think it speaks equally to the Lions themselves, but also a lack of confidence in the Bears. The Bears have not been a very good team on the season. At times, they've shown glimpses of being good, but certainly the Lions have been a more consistent team throughout the season, and that should hopefully spell a victory for us this weekend, Joe, and get us up to 10 wins here in 2023.
I know. What's the status of the win-loss record for our Pick'em segment? Because I think I'm behind by one game.
You are behind just by one. So you are currently sitting at 8-4, and Jeffrey and I matched the Lions at 9-3. So we're all right there. I think these couple of games here against Denver, Minnesota, and Dallas could be the parts where the Pick'em segment gets decided with that overall record. Because I know there's some potential there for us to be seeing some differing picks than we've seen so far this season. So
I'm telling you, there's 3 games the Lions are going to lose down the stretch, and it's just a matter of what games those are going to be. I think it's Denver, I think it's Dallas, and I think it's one of the Minnesota games. If I can pick correctly those 3 losses, and Detroit still wins the division. If they go on the roller coaster and they kind of go like this, and then they go like this at the end of the season, maybe they'll have a high rise before the finale of the season.
Well, let's see. But Edward here, I don't know. I don't know if you've been getting too much influence from my dad, but not liking the matchup, going with a low-scoring last-second score and giving it to the Bears, 2017. That sounds eerily like something my father would go with for the Bears there with the victories. But we'll have to see. We'll have to get you back drinking the Lions Kool-Aid, Edward, and hopefully they can restore your faith here with a victory at Soldier Field. And yeah, it'll be huge being 10-3, keeping pace with San Francisco and Philadelphia and Dallas. And this is exciting times, Joe. It's rare that we're talking about this team being in contention for the number 1 seed, let alone the number 1 seed in the NFC, but being in contention for the playoffs. Usually we're talking about, okay, if we lose this game, we'll be getting this draft pick. We're looking for losses instead of wins. So it's a nice change of pace, and it's nice to have a football team where we can look forward to having some football, not only here to close out the year, but also in early 2024 and see what they can do in the postseason.
Most certainly.
All right. Well, we want to thank everybody for tuning in. This has been the Lions Grid. I think this is our 17th episode of the season. So,
And I've only missed 2 of them. I've only missed 2 of them this year.
You've had great attendance. We've been doing good. So we'll continue to chug along.
One of the weeks. Showed up late one of the weeks.
Oh, it's all you were here. That's all that matters. So we, definitely appreciate everyone for tuning in and being here with us along the way. We of course will have episodes the remaining weeks as well, and you can find us here Thursdays at 6 p.m. Coming to you live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and Twitter. So make sure you go ahead and like our profiles, and you'll stay up to date with us when we go live on Thursdays at 6 p.m. And then, of course, that's just the regular season. We'll have to determine our schedule, Joe, for the playoffs, because at this point, unless something horrible happens, it's looking like we'll be seeing our Detroit Lions in the playoffs. So we'll have to get that squared away as well. But until next week, I'm Kevin Marhine. Thanks, Joe, for joining me here on the Lions Grid. And we'll catch everybody during next week's episode. Thank you, and have a good night, everyone.